In this video, I'm going to try and attempt to make a tier list of SQL Server functions. I'm a big fan of anime, and I first found out about tier lists from anime tier lists. For example, here is a list of anime waifus. God tier waifus are at the top, and it scrolls down to less desirable waifus. If you want to make your own tier lists, then you can visit tiermaker.com. I'm getting way too distracted with anime waifus, so let's get on with our SQL Server tier list. I've been a SQL Server developer for 25 years now, so I'm going to rank these functions in terms of usefulness and also how often I've used them in my career. So let's get started with the first one, which is Quotename. So in 25 years of SQL development, I've never used Quotename. Let's have a look and see what it does. So it takes one argument, which is a string, and outputs a string surrounded by square brackets. There's a second optional parameter, and if you put one in, it will use that character to surround the string. Just remember, if you want to use Quotename with single quotes, then you have to put 2 in, so we end up with 4 quotes for the second argument there. You'll see that there are limitations. It won't put in a long string, can put an @ sign in. So it's only specific characters it will use. Personally, I can't see a very practical use of Quotename, although if you disagree with me, then please do add a comment below. I'm going to move Quotename and put it as an F tier function. Now let's look at the count function. So count is an extremely useful function. If you're learning SQL, it's quite likely you would learn the count function in your first day. As its name suggests, count can count the number of rows in a database. So count star can be used to count all of the rows in a database. It's really useful. We can add a where clause to count. So this just counts particular rows. Count is also a vital part of so many longer queries. So personally, I think count is really indispensable, a very useful SQL command, and we will put this for S tier. Now let's look at the Coalesce function. In my first programming job, I worked with a guy that I quickly nicknamed the Coalesce guy. He used to use Coalesce in pretty much every single SQL stored procedure he ever wrote. While I found Coalesce a bit of a confusing concept at first, I soon realised it was an incredibly useful function. So to see what Coalesce does, we need to find a database with lots of nulls in. So let's have a look at the sizing data of products. So to use Coalesce, you simply feed in a list of column names, or you can put in text strings. The Coalesce function will then return the first non-null value that it encounters in this list. So if size is null, it will return class, but if class is null, then it will return unknown sizing. So here you see that mostly it will return unknown sizing, but there are some products we actually have numbered sizes for, like here. So here it would have returned size. This one, it's returned the class, and for the others, it's returned this one. So if you have nulls in your database, then Coalesce is super useful. So where do we put Coalesce? I think really it could be S tier, but it's not really indispensable. You can actually write procedures without it. So I think I'm going to put it here at B tier. Now let's look at replicate. So replicate is a string function, and as the name suggests, it just replicates strings. So here it replicates anime, and it replicates it 3 times. As well as working with strings, you can also use it on column values. So here it takes the first name from the person column and replicates it 3 times. And you can change it to a different number. So where does replicate stand on our tier list? In 25 years of SQL programming, I've never once used it, so it's going down here. Now let's look at another SQL function you might not have heard of, Soundex. So the Soundex function takes a string argument and returns a 4-character code depending on the word. How is this function useful? Well, it can be used to match similar words. These 2 names return the same Soundex code. When I first started programming in SQL, I found that this function was quite intriguing, but I never actually found a use for it. About the only people that really use it extensively are those processing census data and genealogy records. Here it's useful to find names that sounds very similar but maybe spelt slightly differently. So if you're writing code in certain fields, it can be quite useful, but the rest of us is not really that useful, so I'm going to assign it to tier E. Next we'll look at concat_ws. One of my criticisms of SQL is it's not terribly good at string handling, certainly not compared to the likes of C# and Java. In SQL Server 2017, Microsoft introduced the new concat_ws function. So to show you what it does, I can do a traditional string concatenation using plus signs. Another way to write this code would be to use concat_ws. And you can see it has the same result. So why would we want to use concat_ws? It just makes your code slightly cleaner. It can be quite useful in some circumstances. However, this is not a function I've actually used. So where do we put this function? I think it's quite a useful function and certainly can lead to cleaner code in your stored procedures. However, it's something I've not used and I'm not really keen on the name. I think they could have come up with a better name. I'm going to give this a D. If you think I've been a bit unfair on this function, then do leave a comment below. So now let's look at GETDATE. SQL is used extensively for reporting and data dashboards. Consequently, being able to get the date is extremely important. So that query gets today's date, and here's a couple more. The second one gets yesterday's date, and the third one gets tomorrow's date. I made a short video about how to find yesterday's date in SQL, and there's a link in the description below. I'd say that due to the importance of dates in SQL generally, the GETDATE has to be up here as a God tier function. Now let's have a quick look at the sum function. So sum is a pretty easy function to understand. It just adds up numbers. So this is summing all of the vacation hours in the database table. It's a pretty easy function to understand too. The main problem is that people often get confused between sum and count. If you have any interviews or exams or tests related to SQL, then make sure you know the difference between these. So count, we saw earlier in the video, counts things up. Sum adds them up. I think sum is an absolutely essential function. However, I tend to use it not quite as much as count. So I think it will be an A tier function. Two more functions to quickly look at. The next one we'll do IIF. So the W3 Schools website considers IIF to be an advanced function, but it's really not too difficult to understand. It basically evaluates an expression. If it's true, it will return one string, and if it's false, it will return another one. Oh dear. So this function evaluates as anime is not cool. We can also use it with column values. So this function looks at the products table. If days to manufacture is less than 1, then it will return yes. If it's not, then it will return no. So this is quite an elegant function for use in such circumstances. Although this function is quite useful and can write some quite elegant code, I've not actually used it, so I'm going to give it a C rating. Now let's look at translate, the final function in our list. So translate was introduced into SQL Server from version 2017 onwards. I'm not going to show you how to use it because it really screws my head up. It's really quite confusing. It is used to transpose strings in a function. And I've looked on W3 Schools for an explanation. And I've also looked on Microsoft's website for an explanation. I'm still not entirely sure how to use it. So you might find translate useful if you find yourself writing nested replace functions like this one. I think it's also useful if you're writing out JSON from your SQL statements. There may be potential uses for this, but I've never encountered it and it's really hard to understand, so I'm going to give it an E. So here is my first ever tier list of SQL Server functions. If you agree or disagree with me, then please do leave a comment below. Also, let me know if you like this video and I'll do some more similar ones. Thanks for watching.